Hello, my name is Justin Coffey, and this is Critical Thinking in Math, a guide to creating critical thinkers. First, let's talk about what critical thinking is. And critical thinking is students who are formulating vital questions. So a lot of times in critical thinking, students aren't necessarily given the question, but they are creating the questions that they want to find answers to. Students are also involved in the process of gathering and assessing relevant information. In critical thinking, students aren't just given the information to solve a problem, but they need to go out and find the information to solve that problem and decide which information is relevant for that problem. In critical thinking, students are also using an open mind and considering alternative systems of thought. So a lot of times their same way of thinking isn't enough to solve the problem, and so they're thinking of different ways that they could think about the problem. And students are arriving at a well-reasoned conclusions and solutions. I think the key term here is well-reasoned. They are not just finding an answer, they are formulating reasons why their conclusion and solution make sense. And then finally, students are effectively communicating solutions to complex problems. And I think that's a key component, that students are able to talk about why their solution makes sense and how they came up with that solution. So let's also talk about what critical thinking is not. And critical thinking is not students memorizing steps to solve mathematical problems. And this is what we've seen a lot in math classes in the last 100 or 200 years, is teachers asking students to memorize steps to solve certain math problems. Critical thinking is not students mirroring the thought process of instructors. We do want to model good thought process and how we think about problems, but we also want students to create their own thought process. And that's really what critical thinking is students formulating their own process. So are we going to show them our thought process? Are we going to walk them through ours? Absolutely, but what we want to get to is where students are using their own thought process. Critical thinking is not students completing worksheets with a single style of question repeated numerous times. And again, this is a teaching strategy that we have seen in math for several years now, hundreds of years, where teachers teach a method to solve a certain type of problem and then drill it into students' head with multiple problems on a worksheet or from a textbook. Critical thinking is not students without an understanding of the reasoning behind the solution. So a lot of times our students are really good at finding the answer, but they don't understand why that answer makes sense or how they got to that answer. And so that's not really critical thinking, that's students being really good at passing tests. And then finally, critical thinking is not students who are unable to communicate their solutions. We want critical thinkers who are able to communicate why their solutions make sense and how they got there. So now that we know what critical thinking is, let's talk about how do we create critical thinkers. And first of all, in math class, we must create active learning environments. The times where we could have students sit and get information is over, and we need students active in their learning. We also must be able to create an emotional connection to our content. It is not good enough anymore to teach students how to solve x plus 3 equals 5. We need to teach them why that's important and really have them connect with this content and see how they can use it in their lives. We also must allow our students to fail and then teach them how to persevere through the adversity. Especially in math class, a lot of times our students make a mistake or they don't pass a test and they don't know how to react to that, and they give up and they quit. So we need to teach students that in life you're going to fail. There's going to be times where you don't succeed, and it's how you respond and how you get over that adversity that defines who you are. So we need to teach that in our math classes. We also must stop telling students they are right or they are wrong, and allow them to use evidence and defend their conclusions. So too often in math, a student gets an answer of x equals 5, and the teacher says, yes, you are right, or no, that is wrong. So instead of jumping to those conclusions, we need to do a better job of stepping back and allowing the student to defend why that solution makes sense, or perhaps another student to step up and defend their solution and create a debate and a discussion about which solution might be the better choice. So now that we kind of know about critical thinking and how to create critical thinkers, I want to talk a little bit about project-based learning. What is project-based learning? Project-based learning is a teaching method that is purposefully designed for students to learn concepts and content while solving real-world problems, building, evaluating, problem-solving, and creating. So project-based learning is where we use a project or a problem or some sort of construction where students are going to need the math content to build that or solve that problem, and so they learn about how to use the math and how to work through the process of using that math in order to create something or build something or solve a problem. So when teachers use project-based learning, the cool thing that happens is students take an active role in the learning process. They're not sitting at their desk listening to a lecture. They're getting hands-on. They're building something. They're working on something. They're researching something. Also, students create an emotional connection to their learning. If you design a really good project-based learning activity or lesson, then you are building one that students are going to connect to, and students are going to be excited to build and create. And so that creates that emotional connection to their learning. Also, in project-based learning, it happens all the time. Students make mistakes, and they learn from those opportunities. And so that's a really valuable thing in critical thinking. And then finally, students learn to communicate with evidence to support their conclusions. So that's something that we've talked about before, but in any well-designed project-based learning, there's some sort of presentation or some sort of report that students need to make where they use their communication skills to support their evidence, to support their conclusion. So now that we've talked about project-based learning, let me give you some tips to creating critical thinkers in a math class. My first tip is, rather than solving story problems from the text or a worksheet, do your own story problems. So this is kind of how I started out in project-based learning, is I read a problem in the textbook about Jimmy throwing a ball and how long the ball was in the air, and students were supposed to solve the maximum height of that ball. Well, after a while I started thinking, why don't we go outside and throw a ball ourselves, and we could time how long it's in the air, and we can solve the problem that way. And that was kind of my first project-based learning experience. And I think that's a really good tip, because we have these story problems in our textbooks or on worksheets, or we find these story problems, but students don't make a connection to those story problems. So if you go out there and actually create your own story problem, then that allows students, number one, to be active in their learning, and number two, to make a connection with what's going on in that story problem. My second tip is, as you solve problems throughout your life, if you're doing a home improvement project, or you're having to make some purchasing decisions, maybe which cell phone plan to go with, or any other problem that you run into every day, if you could take just a second and ask yourself, if and how can you use this situation in your math class? And not every single situation is going to work, and not every single situation is going to work in algebra or geometry, but when we stop and think about everything that's going on, and sometimes we have to adapt and make up some scenarios to make it fit our exact content, but a lot of the problems that we run into in everyday life will make great algebra projects or great geometry projects. And so that's another thing that I do when I'm looking to create project-based learning and I'm looking to develop critical thinkers in my math class. I want to look at everyday problems that I need to solve myself and see if I can have my students solve that problem for me. And then my last tip is to use your resources to search for ideas. The internet is full of different ideas for project-based learning, and I go to that a lot. And a lot of times I go to the internet and I don't use things that I find on the internet, but I get inspiration and I find starting ideas, and then I build upon them myself to make them fit my curriculum and fit my students. Um, I also sometimes I find really elaborate projects that are totally cool, but maybe I don't have time for something that complex. So I chop it down and take parts out of that project that I need for myself. So those are some tips to help build critical thinkers in your math class. I think I have one more here. I do. I have a bonus tip for you, and that is understand that you will make mistakes, but you will learn. When I first got into project-based learning and building critical thinkers in my math class, it was not pretty. And even today, a lot of times I learn from my mistakes. We do things in class that didn't go perfect, or after class I go, man, I wish I would have done this instead. But that's kind of what us being critical thinkers as teachers is all about also, is evaluating what we've done and how we can make it better. And so just understand that this is a process and it's not easy. If it were easy, then we'd have a world full of critical thinkers. Um, but you're going to make mistakes, and just learn from those mistakes and make it better the next time. Hey, I did use some references here to gather this information. So one place that I went was the Critical Thinking Community, and you can find them at criticalthinking.org. And another place I went to was the Buck Institute for Education, and you can find them at BIE.org. Criticalthinking.org has a lot of information about what is critical thinking and how do we create critical thinkers. And the Buck Institute for Education has a lot of great information about project-based learning if you're looking for more information about project-based learning. Hey, thanks for listening again. My name is Justin Coffey, and I will talk to you later. Bye.